So everyone, welcome to our advertised guest. Welcome back, Joe.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's
again.
great. Wonderful to have you back. So, and you know Kitch already. You met him in the last time we were broadcasting.
What's up?
Kitch is our Irishman. We've lost a few people, just tech hasn't been on our side, and as you see in our chat room, we're getting, everyone's blaming Illuminati, chemtrails, flying spaghetti. It's all coming right there.
I'd like to blame Ron Paul, please.
So, I don't know. Where do you want to start off, Joe? Is there anything you want to bring to the table straight off?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did something today. I just want to show you something. I went and did a one-person picket again.
All right.
God dang it, my camera's backwards. I made a picket sign that says, "We need to leave Iran alone."
Okay.
And so I went to the Texas State Capitol, where I like to go picket once in a while.
Oh.
And I did a one-person picket, actually, until a second person came along who goes there a lot by the name of Peace. And I've just made a video, and that's why I'm kind of late, because I got kind of lost in the video editing.
All right,
and
yeah.
Had a good picket today, and that was a lot of fun.
Was it a one-man picket again? I know you do them quite a bit.
Right, and I'm trying to inspire more people to take part, but you know, it's so enjoyable I can't stay away just because I'm all alone. And I know I wasn't alone in my sentiments also, because I got a lot of thumbs up from drivers and passers-by, and this other person came and picketed with me, but it wasn't even really a picket. It was just a friendly show of happiness and peace and goodwill, I guess. Actually kind of a religious person, I found out as I was talking to her, but she was very nice and friendly, and we also commented how we get along on this one issue of peace and goodwill towards countries that are not attacking us, and that doesn't matter if we have disagreements on other issues, but this one issue is important enough to both of us that we could stand on a cold street corner. It was about 40 degrees, I think, but we felt really good, and just saying something that's important to say, and I'm making the video. I'll be uploading that soon.
All right, cool. And so do you have any other news for us from the last time? Because, well, every time I look at your Facebook, it's just amazing. I don't know how you find all the time to find these stories, and how passionate you are about a lot of them as well.
Absolutely, and there's a lot going on. In fact, I do have a couple of issues I wanted to talk about real quick. In March in Houston, Texas, a preacher from Nigeria will be visiting the United States. Helen Ukpabio has a church and several locations in Nigeria where she has a very large following of Christian followers. She's a Christian preacher, and she's one of those preachers who has been spreading and promoting the belief in demon possession and the mythological side of witchcraft. And she's been encouraging people to do exorcisms. And as we may all know, and I hope we all know, that the news out of Nigeria is very bad lately on a lot of different issues, but one of them is the fact that a lot of people are being forced to be exorcised and also being abused because of the perception that they might be witches and that they might be demon-possessed. And a lot of people have been hurt by that and killed, and including children. And there are videos on YouTube of some really horrific activities where people are accused of witchcraft or being possessed and treated horribly, and it's easy to watch those videos, but it's hard to believe this is really happening. And we're talking about a country that lacks education across the board in a way that we here in the United States take for granted, and in the rest of the developed world, I believe, because still several nations in Africa are not only going through civil war and religious strife, but are also suffering from the famine, the drought, and the general poverty that leads to a lack of education. And this, I believe, is one area where certain religious groups, not all, but certain extremist religious groups are parasitic about going into certain countries where there isn't enough education for people to stand up and say collectively that we won't tolerate any kind of behavior that's harmful to people based simply on irrational claims. Like here in the United States, we allowed spectral evidence to be admissible into court for a long time in our history, up until about the Salem witch trials, which eliminated that in the end. That was the culminating effect of all of that, was the fact that we got rid of spectral evidence as a way of accepting evidence into court against someone, because it really wasn't a form of evidence. It was more of a claim. And that's what is really dominating the mindset of a lot of people in Nigeria and other countries like the Congo and some other countries around the world. But Helenu Pabio is one of these successful Christian preachers, one of the most successful Christian preachers in Nigeria, and one of her absolute centers of success is around this idea that she's going to try to get people to turn against their fellow human on irrational reasons. And there's been kidnappings and brutal torture and imprisonment and murders of people who are accused of witchcraft and being possessed, and including children. And it's horrible what's happening there. Well, she's coming to the United States, and this is not the first time. I believe she came here in 2010, and she's coming here to preach several nights of basically a symposium of preaching to a local church that's affiliated right here in Texas. And we're surprised to find with research on this that there are lots of churches all over the United States which agree with her. And I've known this for years too. There was a man who wrote a really great book about exorcism after traveling across the country to talk to a lot of people about this and followed and observed exorcisms. And it's no joke, it's real here in the United States, but in Africa there's a lot more potential for abuse. And we've seen news reports where it's included murder. And so what we're trying to say, I and some other activists who care, not just atheists but others as well, including Christians, are saying that here in the United States, at the very least, we have the free speech to be able to go and wage a picket, a peaceful demonstration, a legal peaceful demonstration outside of this church for every day that she's here preaching a belief that children can be a danger to other people with their supernatural evil powers of witchcraft, and that they should be rounded up and then converted or killed. And she will try hard to claim that she's innocent on this, but we are finding out that it is a very important issue that we can talk about, but a lot of Nigerians simply are afraid, and rightfully so, to speak out in public because it's such a volatile situation over there to begin with. But that's one thing I have on my calendar soon, is to protest this person who promotes, successfully and effectively promotes, harm from religion in a place that could use that. And wrong, it's just wrong for them to bring that to Nigeria, and she's a native of Nigeria. It just seems like she's causing harm in her own country, and that other people in other countries who have the freedom to say so need to. And so we're just going to have a picket there on a sidewalk for every day that she's giving these sermons. Other things I'm interested in, of course, are the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C., but I don't think I can go to that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
if I may, there was a question in the chat room. What is spectral evidence?
Well, in courts of law, back in the 1700s, 1600s in the United States, and I'm not a historian, but the Salem witch trials were a very famous set of trials against mostly young women, but others as well, who were accused of witchcraft. And the kind of evidence that was presented against them, because there were courts of law and judges and lawyers, so they had the basis for what we have now, the basics, the foundation of law, but they still had something called spectral evidence. And all that is the ability to go and give evidence in court based upon something that isn't a material form of evidence, but rather a spiritual or religious or ghost-like or mythological form of evidence. And what they came up with was victims or supposed victims who claimed to have been attacked spiritually or religiously in some way by a witch. And they would act out, and there are movies that have been made about this, but they would act out this supposed victimization by acting crazy. Now, of course, we now know it's easy for a person to fake this sort of thing. Well, back then they didn't think so skeptically, and they would accept the testimony of a person acting insanely in court as the fact, not simply the claim, but the evidence. And they call it, this is the evidence that a person has been cursed by a witch in town, and we have to do something about that witch. Well, it could just be that this person is lying and making it up just to get back at somebody over a previous problem, or just going after somebody because they're angry, or maybe they're crazy in reality, but they're just shaping it in a way that people will believe, you see. And they were so angry at witches at the time that they would accept this irrational testimony as actual evidence instead of what it really was, just more claims from people who can't back them up. But in evidence in court, they could sit at the stand and act crazy like they were demon-possessed and point the person out. And it literally became a free-for-all. and it got out of control, and eventually the courts realized this is not a reliable form of evidence at all. That's spectral evidence, and we don't allow that in court anymore, and for a darn good reason. And that was abolished years, over 100 years ago. In Africa and other countries that just don't have enough education, in African countries, there just is still a reliance on that. And you'll find that the government of Nigeria has not been terribly helpful on this issue because some of them actually believe it. And it's terribly sad. But we're going to say so, and other things like this in support of freedom and tolerance of people who just need to go to the doctor sometimes because they're ill. Plus, she'll sometimes complain saying that a child is possessed when she'll list off symptoms. And these symptoms will often mirror the symptoms of a child who has been starved or is in famine, has not been fed enough, is malnourished. And the exact same symptoms sometimes. And she'll point to a child like that and say that child is possessed or that's a witch. Go get them. And you can read about this in the news, how in the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot more of this recently. And I believe it's almost at epidemic level. And plus, Nigeria is going through a religious war, and it's going through the civil war. The government there is weak, and it's a terrible situation. It's one of the most horrible religious situations. I often wish the United States government would take a look at that if they're going to look at liberating anybody. Nigeria right now is in the grip of a religious civil war combined with what Helen and others are doing there. We're going to speak out against that. And what do you think?
Yeah.
It sounds like a terrible situation would be an understatement. This sounds like religion really gone amok, and it's hard to believe that she's actually being invited to the United States to spread more of this ferocious, vile doctrine.
Yeah.
We've been communicating with the State Department, the United States State Department, to try to get her entry into the United States at least challenged or maybe stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having difficulty getting a response from them on this, but there's already a petition that's been circulating. I think it's change.org or something. Anyway, a lot of people are doing something about this. We've got a Facebook page going.
Yeah.
You can do a search for Stand Against Helen Ukpabio, and that's Ukpabio. There's a Facebook page for the protest, and we encourage people who support this to like that page and maybe even show up. But this will be in Houston in March. More details are coming, like an exact location. We've nailed down exactly where that church is, but that church has not announced where they're going to have this exactly.
Yeah.
And I get the strong impression that they may have already checked out our Facebook page and decided that this might not be a good idea, and that just because they don't want negative publicity, they may not do it. And plus, I'm also wondering what airport in Nigeria is still operating safely enough for her to want to go out of the country, because every time we hear about the situation in Nigeria, it just is getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible she may not show up at all.
Yeah. Well, saying that, like, I know just from working in the oil industry, she might be getting out with some oil workers or something like that. That's the only way, because those flights are high, they're really protected. That's personal knowledge. I have a cousin who used to work in Nigeria for a few months. And yeah, his tales of what he saw there are just not good at all either. But as I we're going to move on, like one of the topics of the show, you were going to spill the beans on your time as the director of American Atheists for Texas, wasn't it?
Well, mostly what I wanted to talk about was my time as an employee of American Atheists.
So I was going to say, so what's it like to be a professional atheist then? That'll be the job description.
Right, well, that wasn't exactly the job description, but I think that is an unwritten part of the job in itself, because I started off just as an employee in Austin when the headquarters were here, and I just helped out around the office and learned more and got more involved, and then we moved it all up to New Jersey in 1999, and that's when I became the office manager. And I worked directly under the president, who also lived in New Jersey, and so I had this whole building. And now, she lived in another city, though, so she didn't spend a whole lot of time there. But I had this whole office building to myself most of the time. It was like 9,500 square feet, and it was beautiful. And I made it my goal as part of Office Manager to try to help the group grow and to put out as much information as possible and get involved with the activism that was going around all over the place there in the Eastern Seaboard. And of course, I went to all the conventions and worked those, but we had just a whole lot of interesting experiences that other atheist groups may not have had. I mean, I've wanted to write another book about this. I wrote a book about how I became an atheist, but I've wanted to write one about what I've done as an activist, and part of that was spending full time, getting with the salary too, of being a full-time employee of a national atheist group, really meant a whole lot of exposure to the movement on a regular basis, of course, and a lot of opportunity to get on TV. The Atheist Viewpoint was the TV show, and still is, for American atheists, and I was a guest on that many times, and that was a lot of fun. But when, for instance, in New York City, we were in New Jersey, but very close to New York City, and I would go there for activism once in a while. And once the Ku Klux Klan decided to have a little rally in New York City, of all places, and there was a great, huge crowd of counter-protesters, of course, and so I decided to go down there, and I didn't have a video camera with me, but I definitely wrote down things and took pictures, and I tell you, I wasn't even into activism that much, but it was really inspiring to see so many people there in reaction to the KKK, and they only brought out about a dozen people, and about 5,000 to 6,000 people there were against them. In New York City, now, it was like a YouTube video, with Bono, you know, and Edge, where all these groups of people were marching down the street with red flags, and there was steam coming up out of the manholes, right? And they were coming around, marching, taking up the whole street. And this was before Occupy, of course. But the police had this barricaded area, a bullpen sectioned off for the counter-protesters, and it just grew and grew and grew, and they kept having to expand it. And when the KKK finally came in, you could barely see them or hear them. I couldn't anyway, but there was so many people there against them, you see, and it just built up this great inspiration in me to do more. And it was the same at St. Patrick's Cathedral when George W. Bush went there. And there were hundreds of protesters on the street corner, on the sidewalk across the street. And I was there early, because I knew that's what happens. You get there early, you get a great spot right on the edge, and everybody else is behind you. That's how many people there were, about 500. And it didn't even occur to me that I was going to picket a church, because a lot of atheists don't want to do anything as extreme as that. But I did this with 500 other people, and we all agreed on at least the one issue of George W. Bush, but also many of us were there because we were angry at the Catholic Church. But there was such a collective agreement there that I was inspired to do more. And I took a lot of great pictures, but this is one of those things I was able to do as an activist and kind of blend in my free time with the work time. It all worked out very well, and you know, I went to these conventions and had a lot of fun, but there was adversity too. Like back in Austin here, we had the general headquarters, which was a larger building. And before we moved up to New Jersey, we were packing things together. And for a while there, for a few weeks, we began to have a problem with an intruder in the building. Not a person, but an animal. It was a possum. Actually, it was several possums would come into our building somehow, and we didn't know how, and they would get up into the attic. And they would climb around in the attic for a while, and then they would get onto a tile that was too soft to hold them, and they would drop down through the tile into the room below that, and that was usually the library, where we kept our very expensive free thought books, you know. We would come in the mornings and see a tile on the floor, and see some possum crap on the floor next to it, right? And we'd have to spend the first hour or so locating this little animal inside our library. And then we would take it and put it in a cage, and then take it out somewhere and release it. We were nice to them. Everybody would hopefully like to hear that, you know. We were very nice to them. But, you know, that's one of the little things that happens when you've got an organization that's big enough for a building and is active with employees. And we printed things, and we had problems and adversity. Yeah. I wish I could see the chat room.
All right. Yeah, well, we're just kind of monitoring. I think if you just go to Blog TV, we'll give you a link in our chat. I think you can just watch it as a guest, and you'll be able to see what's going on in the chat room. So I'll fire the link through in a second. It was a question someone asked, and I was expecting this. They were asking, what's it like to work with Dave Silverman? Or
Well,
did you really work with him at all?
Yes, when I was an employee there, I worked there for 8 years, and that ended in 2004, and Dave Silverman was the national spokesperson at the time, and he and I worked together several times, starting in 1997. In fact, that's one of my favorite stories. The first time I ever picketed for anything out loud, really, with a sign in my hands on a street corner, was in Washington, D.C., at the National Mall in 1997, and we were picketing the Stand in the Gap situation, the event being put on by the Promise Keepers back when they were very powerful and they were very growing. They were very in the news all the time. And American Atheist was just recovering after the disappearance of the Murray O'Hares, and then by 1997 we were becoming stronger again with membership and activism. So we had this symposium there in 97 in Washington, D.C., and part of that was to go picket the Promise Keepers, and I was standing on a street corner right next to David Silverman. We were holding up signs, and that's the first time I got on TV for this movement also. I was on CNN.com with Dave Silverman and some others, and we just said the same thing again and again. It was only about 4 seconds worth of coverage on CNN we were on there, but we all said the same thing: tax the church, at the top of our lungs. And I was very proud of that. And yes, looking back on that, I'm so proud that I picketed with Dave Silverman and so many others who are now very prominent in the movement over the years. Every time American Atheists would have a national convention or a regional atheist meet or a rally or a march, I was usually there for 8 years. And man, Dave's a great guy. I mean, we had some great experiences together, Hope that answers that.
Well, it was just, I think it was one of our theists, he actually said Dave Silvermoron, so you can get where that question was coming from. So, like, see from when you started with American Atheists to now, has there definitely been a warming towards atheists, like from American Christians, do you think? Is there a better environment for atheists in America now?
In the United States?
Yeah, like from when you first got involved in the movement to, say, today, is the atmosphere better towards atheists in general?
Absolutely better, yes. My goodness. Our movement has come so far. I started in 1996, and not just American Atheists, but other groups were very concerned at the time with the backlash against people in our position of activists who say what we say, and we had good reason to be concerned. As late as the 90s, there was violent attacks against some of us, and you don't hear about it in the news very much. But especially after the disappearance of the Murray O'Hares, not just, like I said, not just American Atheists, but other groups became concerned about possible violence against atheist activists. And so I was working in the headquarters 1 year after they disappeared, and the heat, so to speak, from the media and the investigation and all was still very warm and hot at certain times, but we would often get a lot of attention from the media. And it included this idea that, hey, don't you think it's possible the Murray O'Hares were kidnapped and murdered by Christians who are angry at their activism and angry at American atheists in general? And don't you think it's possible they could come here and do the same thing to you? And are you taking any measures about that? And then the next thing would be also, often the media would say that we're living in a bunker mentality because we had a chain link fence around the building and all the windows around the building were the one-way mirror type windows, two-way mirror, I guess. And we had an alarm system in the building, things like that. But that we were careful about making sure everybody had an appointment before they came in because we were busy. There's a lot of reasons why it was irrational to say that. But at the same time, we did not know at the time what happened to the Murray O'Hares. And so at the time, we were concerned about Christians being very angry at us, yes. And we were still receiving a lot of hate mail for the Murray O'Hares. And we even had some people who had sent mail year after year. One person would send a letter, in the same handwriting and everything, preaching to us year after year after year, would send more and more mail. And so we would be concerned about these things, yes, of course. But over the years, we also saw that the more people came out, the easier it is for other people to come out. And that we not only grew after that, but that the movement grew. We saw a great increase in the movement. And by 2001, of course, the ERIS survey came out, which was the American Religious Identification Survey, and that showed an increase in people who don't have a religion. And suddenly, yes, it became very clear that it's suddenly becoming a lot safer just because our numbers are increasing. Now, with a lot of incidents here and there are little things that happen in which we find out that in some areas there are pockets of resistance, as you might say, right? But that overall, the growth of acceptance and tolerance of atheists and free thought in general has improved and increased. And we've seen survey after survey showing that in the United States anyway, the identification of no religion is the group identification that seems to be growing the fastest. And it's no mistaking why, I think, because we also see news reports sometimes in the same front page of things like more child sex abuse in the Catholic Church, or more polygamy in breakaway Mormon churches, or more cults that are getting ready for the end times, or more money being spent on religious war. If you don't know, and if your fans don't know, I'm one of these atheists who feels that the war we're involved in right now seems to be a war of Christianity versus Islam, with Judaism being on the side of Christianity. But it's sad, too, because there's so much fighting going on to begin with over other issues, and a lot of them are religious, but when religious fundamentalism gets involved with running a government, it's like we've said, history shows we need to keep government and religion separate. Today, of all times in history, this is being played out, I think. What do you think?
I absolutely agree.
Definitely. Especially in places like America and other superpowers, religion needs to be kept separate from the government. Unfortunately, here in Ireland, it's secular to a high degree, but there's still God in the Constitution, and there's still an awful lot. There are secular schools, but they're so few and far between. I can't actually think of one within. Actually, I can't even think of one anywhere near where I live, except for maybe a multi-dominational school.
Yeah, it's like the old story in Northern Ireland. They could tell what religion you were just by the name of the school you went to, wasn't it?
Yeah. Or what was the other one? I was sorry of it was the fella being pulled up by a gunman, and he was asked, "Are you Catholic? Are you a Protestant?" And he said, he replied, "I'm an atheist." So are you a Catholic atheist? Or are you a Protestant atheist?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
And I keep finding it so ironic that here in Sweden, where we have a state church and you're born into it, and I had to opt out, 80% of the people are atheists.
Do you have to go through an official thing to opt out?
Yeah.
No,
yeah, you're born into the church. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think they changed it now because we've got so many immigrants coming in that want to be, we have a lot of Muslims, for example, and they obviously don't want to be born into a Christian church. And I think that's what made the government finally realize that we probably shouldn't have people being born into the church. But I was born into it, and it's something that still pisses me off because my parents are atheists.
So it's like more ceremonial kind of thing, is it?
Yeah, I don't get it because we all had to opt out. They stayed in the church a long time because to them it wasn't a big deal. But then they saw the bill, I guess, and realized that holy shit, we're paying taxes to the church here, and we don't have to. Hey, we probably shouldn't.
Well,
and then they informed me that I was also in the church, and I was like, what the hell? Get me out of it.
Are the taxes really high there?
Insanely high?
Well, we keep hearing how Europe's taxes are much higher than ours, and we shouldn't be complaining, especially on gasoline.
Yeah.
No, especially
but our taxes are really high, but we get a lot for it. So actually, I think it's a good system we have. I mean, for example, I don't have to pay for my university education, which I think is great. And I have to take loans to finance, myself, but I don't have to pay any tuitions or anything like that. But of course, healthcare, it's all paid for.
Over here,
so it's I think it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I'd say the same as well.
Over here, it's not as good. Although I do have to admit, I am getting my PhD paid for. I'm going on a government grant for $16,000 a year. But of course, I still have to produce results for it. So it's hopefully.
Man, see, I'd want to live up there. It's just too cold. You guys got to bring your countries down south.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. It's right now. It's been insanely cold for a while.
You might like Dublin. It's humid. It's not as bad as Sweden. Rains a lot though.
Yes, same in Scotland as well. Just a lot of rain. It doesn't really freeze here. We just rains constantly, and sometimes we just skip out the summer and just carry on raining.
Can you believe we're still in drought conditions here in Texas? It rains once in a while, but not enough for us to need more rain all the time.
So
and it actually sleeted today.
So Rick Perry's rain dance never worked then?
Well, after the fact, but when he was doing I mean, if he was wanting it right then and there, it failed. It happened later. No, I mean, he may as well have been praying for fire, because we had big fires at the time.
Yeah.
That's what we were getting, for a variety of reasons, too. But, I mean, huge portions of Texas were burning when he was praying for rain, and this lasted for months. But, yeah, after that hoopla died down, we started having some rain, so I don't know.
I think it shows if God exists, he hates Rick Perry.
Yeah.
Of course, I think everyone.
Who doesn't?
Well,
even Rick Perry likes Rick Perry.
Now that he's not running for president anymore, he's going to be hanging around Texas more, and I think he'll be more in vacation mode. But that there is no term limit for governor's office in Texas. And also, there's no built-in way to have a recall election for the governor's office. And so, the way he's been riding, it's almost a life position. He could be there another 20 years.
Yeah.
Only as governor. Hey, it gives me something to do.
I'm just glad he's not going to get to have his finger on that famous button.
Yes.
I spent 8 years in terror during the Bush administration.
I think we all did.
So, Joe, so how's all the charity work at the moment going? Cause,
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah, well, it was just before. I don't know you saw. We made a little pre-show video that we usually run for an hour, and it was the clip of you with that crazy guy that was going on about how does your heart work. And
yeah.
they were all. Was that actually one of the guys that took some of the aid, or was he just a random?
We looked at the video again and again to try to find out if he went through our line, and we could not find him going through our line. So as far as I could tell, he did not get anything from us, nor probably ever has. But we've seen him there before in the past, and I've seen him on the street corner once in a while. But, I don't think he's ever gotten anything from us for free. No, but he was dedicated, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was interesting to say the least. So does that happen regularly, or?
No, that's very rare.
Yeah.
Very rare indeed. Yeah, everybody who goes under there is either somebody who doesn't care to talk much or has something generally positive to say, and with very few exceptions. Except now, last time we were there were a couple of people fighting just arguing, though, and they were going to start fighting, but they didn't. That's the worst it's been in a year and a half, 2 years, as far as I could tell. The Christian groups that go there, on the other hand, now they help out, and they don't cause fights or anything, of course, but they do give a sermon, and we usually leave before they start that, because we don't want to hear it. But also, our giveaways end pretty quickly, about 20, 30 minutes is all it takes, and we're cold by that point, or just want to go relax somewhere else for a while, or go home or whatever. And, it's tough to get volunteers out to do something on a Sunday morning, bright and early. Anyway, after we leave, the Christian groups get going in earnest, and they set up dozens and dozens of tables and hundreds of chairs and a stage and a couple of bands, at least two, but sometimes just one. And this last time, we stayed a little late. I did with my girlfriend because we were barbecuing, and it took a lot of extra time to make this barbecue. And so I got to hear their sermon, and it was amazing. You've heard of Tim Tebow, right? That football player on his knee. Well, this was a sermon about... What's that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know of him.
Everybody's heard of him, I think. And so the sermon went something like this. We don't like how he wants to make himself into a celebrity. And using religion to make himself into a celebrity is definitely not too cool. But we do want everybody to act like him. Whenever you do something great, you should get on one knee or whatever and thank God and all this. And basically he walked all over himself to some extent, but also said he was not a big football fan. So I respect that. But, it was a topic of the day, and I hadn't paid attention to their sermons, but he turned the topic of the day into something negative, if you can believe that. How do you go from Tim Tebow into condemning people for not being a God believer of some kind? But there was a Bible quote, and I'll have to dig it up again, but he was going on in a couple of different directions that contradicted themselves. First, he said that God's gift of love and salvation to us is free. But all we have to do is, and then he rattled off a long list of things we have to do. Give ourselves up, confess our sins, apologize, grovel, grind our knees into the ground, things like that. I mean, he had his own way of saying it, but it just said to me, even when they want to help people in need, some groups will come out and go all the distance to try to utilize that to get more warm bodies into God's heaven, of course. Or just believing people. And a lot of them don't even have much more goal than that, than to get people just to believe it, and that's good enough for them. And it's so organized. They brought just as many people as there were homeless this time. Almost 2 busloads of volunteers and almost 200 people there who were just from churches. And a lot of them were young people, teenagers and all. It was good to see them helping. But after a while, I was looking around trying to find somebody who was visibly homeless, and I was having trouble finding that. It seemed to be more of a party of volunteers. I like that, too. But definitely they're doing a lot of preaching, and sometimes the preaching is negative. The Bible quote, okay, now I remember it was, "Depart from me, I don't know you." And I'll have to get that exact verse and chapter and book, but it was the one where Jesus would judge everybody, and if you come up short, if you're not that kind of believer that he wants you to be, he might just say, "Get away, I don't know you, I don't want to know you, and you're going to the other place." And Jesus was probably the first character to really drive home that point. He didn't totally give you a clear description of hell as much as we have now, but this was part of the sermon to the homeless. And I think what happened was I left my sign out that said "Atheists Helping the Homeless," and a whole lot of their volunteers walked past, including the pastor, and they saw that and they just go, "Oh, okay, I know what today's sermon is about." And bada bing, we're still there barbecuing, able to hear it all, and I want to hear it, but I'm not there to preach, so I didn't want to talk back. And that's the perfect opportunity. And I didn't videotape it either because I didn't want to upload and say, "Hey, look what they were doing," because that's just as much as preaching. So I just left it, and you should have heard what he said. I should have videotaped it. What am I thinking, right? He said some amazing volatile things, things that just struck me. And my girlfriend was there. We were there helping the homeless, and he was basically saying that we're going to burn in hell despite whatever good works we do when we're on earth. Yeah. And, I don't want to name the group or anything, but suffice to say that this is the kind of thing that we're up against a lot of times when somebody says, hey, if you live in a small town and there's only religious charities to help out the people who need it, then a lot of times somebody would say, can you give to the church or to the religious charity, and don't you want to help the people in need? And of course you do, but you got to give to something secular. Sorry, folks. I don't even know why I'm apologizing. Forget the sorry part. I'm proud to say that I'm free associating, according to our Constitution, says that every group has a right to associate with its own kind if that's what they choose. It doesn't have to be religious. But I always want to say, my kind of group that wants to help is the one that actually wants to help, regardless of whether you're religious or not, because I've met lots of religious people who want to do the help genuinely, and they'll help right alongside us without the preaching. In fact, most of the church groups that go there don't give a preaching session. They just help and then they go. And it's one of those psychological phenomena I just really love to see once a month in action, and marvel at the fact that it's actually helping too. But I don't think we'll barbecue again.
Yeah, it's like there's a charity back in my hometown for, I think it's Moldovan orphans, and I think because they're run by the church as well, and 10% of their money goes into Bibles that gets shipped over to Moldova. Like the rest's all like tins of food and that, but they send, like, they top off the crate with a whole load of Bibles as well. And I was saying you could do so much more if you just left the Bibles out of it. And I was saying you live in the internet age, it's not difficult to get a hold of a Bible now.
Even before the internet.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I've seen that kind of stuff. Well, my hometown's really religious. It's like I came from the Bible Belt of Scotland. Oh, I could tell you some stories about the crazy things I saw there.
Wow. Well, the good news is we're out there once a month helping out without preaching, and without preaching our side either. And we're doing these giveaways. We're finding new volunteers. Also in Houston, Texas, I'm hearing from more people who want to start a chapter of this group. And I'm wanting to reach out to anybody in Houston who wants to help atheists who are proud of it and who wanted to help the people in need. And we just have 3 simple goals: to help people in need, that's number 1. And then secondly, to show by example that atheists do have morals and do want to help occasionally, that we actually get off our butts and do help out people in need. And 3, to have fun, which is important. Some people scoff at that, but I say you have to have fun if you're volunteering, so you'll want to volunteer some more. And of course it's hard to not have fun hanging around with some real nice people. We've made some friends, in case you're wondering. Some homeless people and other volunteers. And so whenever we go there once a month, we see our friends, and it's a delight. And we're trying to get some live music together once again. I usually play my acoustic guitar. I might give that a rest this time, but it's a great town for live music. The Christian groups always bring a band too, and that's interesting. They have some great sounds, and then they start singing. And you wonder, wait a minute now, you had me, then you lost me. But I don't want to criticize. Like I said, it's easy to hear live music in Austin for free, even just walking down the sidewalk of some of our streets, at the right time. Especially 6th Street. If you've ever heard of that, it's amazing how much live music exists in 5 square blocks of a one-way street. It's amazing. But also, one point I wanted to make with live music is that homeless people don't usually get a band out specifically for them as an audience. It's usually for the general public, and homeless can go in. Usually there's an obligation to buy a drink or pay the cover or get a burger or something. So when the music is specifically there for them, no admission and no obligation, we don't even put a tip jar out or anything, that probably hits home a little bit. And I have talked to them too. I said, what do you think about the live music? And they say, yeah, that's good, especially the part about it not being all about Jesus. But I think right where they go to get help, to put some live music there and really put Austin's stamp of approval on it, because, until there's a live band, it's not so much of an Austin thing, is it? But we've had so much fun entertaining people, and I think they like the music too, and that's something to contribute. What else? We're giving out gloves now because it's very cold, and thermal blankets. We gave those out actually in January, so we don't have any more of those. And we're still taking donations of items through the mail. We've had a little difficulty with Google checkout, so for now we're not taking online donations of money. So if anybody would like to send donations of items to give out, or money, they can contact me directly, and we can work on that. And we're still not tax exempt either, so donations are not tax deductible, and we proudly pay sales tax when we buy these items for the homeless.
Yeah.
And I think we want to keep it that way. So that's another little contribution to society we try to make that most churches don't. Anyway.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's you're doing some really, really good work. If you want to post a link to maybe more information if people are interested in helping out and volunteering and donating and...
Yeah, the website is atheistshelpingthehomeless.org. We also have a Facebook page. If you just go to Facebook and do a search for Atheists Helping the Homeless,
I think
we have a group page and a like page.
Yeah. I was going to say, Joe, going back to the Madeleine Mary O'Hare thing, and this is going to tie into your atheist experience time, because I remember Matt saying she used to have a program in Austin. Were you a part of that? And did that was that the genesis, sorry to use this, but was that the genesis of the atheist experience as well?
Well, I wasn't a part of it. I came along in the summer of 1996, and the Murray O'Hares disappeared in September of 1995.
Yeah.
And that's when the show ended, of course. Now, when I came along, the Atheist Viewpoint show was already underway in its infancy, being taped in Staten Island, New York, with Ellen Johnson and Ron Barrier. And they would send the master copies of the tape to Austin, and we would edit them and reproduce them and send them out all across the United States. And that was before we got heavily into the Internet, of course. But then AA decided to move its headquarters out of Austin to New Jersey, so we had a lot of time to prepare for that in the atheist community. Now, at the time, I was getting involved with local activism, and we were trying to create a new group of atheists for Austin that would be a local group and not a national group, separate from American Atheists. Now, other groups had been tried in Austin and it never worked because American Atheists always had the most members in Texas and Austin, and it was hard to compete with that. But also, AA was always in the news in Austin anyway. That was additional competition. So it never worked out for a local group until AA decided to move its headquarters and stop doing activism in Austin for a while. So that opened up a whole niche that needed to be filled for when AA moved. Well, I and some other activists thought we need to help the local group come together. And so I and Spike Tyson was the director of the headquarters at the time, and we worked with a couple of activists outside of AA living in Austin to put together a list of people we could call and bug to get them to go to these meetings. And there were already a couple of meetings. A couple of people had already started by going to them, and they were very small. But we put that together very slowly with others, and a lot of them were members of American Atheists. And so several months later, after a great success with that and growth of the local group, before I moved to New Jersey, I sat in a meeting of the ACA, and I said, hey, folks, you know what? I came up with an idea. We really need to try this. Since the Atheist Viewpoint is a weekly show in New York, what we ought to do here with the local group is start a local TV show about atheism, where we're on public access, like American Atheist was also in Austin's public access TV show station. And I said, we should try that to have a talk show, and maybe with calls, and make it live, so we can interact with the viewing audience. And immediately some people said, well, that will never work. The TV station won't allow it. We'll never get the volunteer help. People will shoot us in the parking lot, etc. And so it took a while, but I kept circulating the idea with others, and others agreed. And so we worked and found some people willing to volunteer to do the production work and get the license and put that together. And it slowly turned into that show. And I was the first host of the first episode, which was the pilot. That was the 30-minute show that was taped at a cafeteria. And then after that, all the shows were live, and I was the first co-host for the first year. And the host was Ray Blevins, another active member of the ACA who was one of those producers who paid and became a licensed producer for the TV show. I didn't. I was busy with American Atheists, so plus I was about to move. But yeah, isn't that show successful, and isn't it awesome? And don't you think I have some great bragging rights here?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Something we say, like,
I watch it all the time.
yeah.
I love it.
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you think, like, from then, like, seeing all these kind of internet shows like our own? I mean, Do you kind of look like how basically you almost sort of kicked that off in a way?
Well, not me, of course.
Yeah, but well, the Atheist Experience itself, sort of, you know, because we've got us, Skeptic TV, there's Gin and Tonic, Magic Sandwich, they're popping up all over the place now.
Yes, and absolutely, there's a lot of influence coming from the Atheist Experience. I think these other shows are great, and I've been on a lot of them.
Yeah.
And but I got to say, with the callers being open to not only the internet live, but also to local Austin public access live, it's got a huge audience compared to most of the other shows. And I think in the future that'll change with the internet. I think we're going to cover a lot more territory soon with the internet, and it's the best direction for these shows. But yeah, I think our movement has been so good about expansion and growth and diversification without infighting because of that. Whereas other movements would say things like, well, your show is too much like mine, so I'm going to sue. And they really would, you know. But in our movement, we cooperate a lot more. I found that to be true. We coalesce and cooperate more with our own groups, and we don't worry so much about logo and copyright infringement and things like that. Whereas other religions, denominations, and groups will often sue themselves, and movements even for civil rights will spend all this time suing people, and it's time wasting. We're trying to keep our focus on our needs and goals as they really are, and we're doing a better job of that, I think, than other movements. So, yeah, shows like you guys and other shows are really helping us put out more information, and I'm, again, very glad y'all are having me on. I thank you so much.
No problem at all. So what's your, any fond memories of the first year of the Atheist Experience, like any callers in particular you can remember that really stick in the mind?
Well, first of all, the first caller that comes to mind was the very first caller on the first show that we had calls, because it was a bit of a crank call. I believe in miracles.
I think on your playlist I've seen he phoned in a few times in the early days, didn't he?
Right.
Yeah, and that's all he would say.
He was one of the most enjoyable callers, too. And Ray had a habit of cutting him off right away. And I said, wait a minute now. This is a really entertaining call. I believe in not miracles. How about that? But then he would call in sometimes and say, good morning, Baldy. And then he'd just come up with these crazy things to say and then get zapped right away. Well, I always wanted to have control over that call box. If you're ever wondering, if you ever watch the old episodes on YouTube, you know, I was always looking at that box saying to myself, I would like to control that. But that's okay. Part of being a co-host is letting somebody else in charge of certain things, and that's okay. But no, I always thought the show had a great deal of potential to be expanded. You know, we started at 30 minutes, and then we moved to an hour, and then an hour and a half. And it became this marathon show compared to most other live shows on public access in Austin. And I just loved having all this time to openly communicate about these things and get the callers. And yeah, some callers were angry, happy, crazy. We got a lot of recurring callers, and I got to say, yeah, the crank callers were probably the most enjoyable ones. And, but, you know, long conversations about philosophy and beliefs can be a little bit old to some people, can wear on you after a while. An hour and a half show is a lot, but just one of the episodes really got to me, though, that it was really a lot of fun. It was one of the last ones I was on when we had a live band in the studio, and they were called Tadpole Cannibalism. This was a kind of a rhythm, noise, drum band that didn't really have much in the way of structure. And I said, so we're going to have you play at the beginning before we start, and then we'll talk for a while, and then have a song, and then how about at the end another one? And they said, great. And I said, how long is your first song? And they go, how long do you want it to be? It's that kind of band. So you can see that on YouTube still, but they thrashed around. They had makeup on. They spent a half an hour in the bathroom before we, you know, that was the dressing room for the whole studio. And they were putting all this makeup on, and I just said, oh boy, you know, we picked the right band for this. It's in color and everything. And so they jumped around, and then by the end of the show, they had destroyed a drum and a guitar, and it was a lot of fun. But that's one of my favorite episodes. They even brought a fog machine. You know, on public access, a lot of this is kind of rare to see, the enjoyment without the Jesus, you see. Yeah. So we got in there and we added the enjoyment with what we do. And a very colorful show. Tadpole Cannibalism. I don't know if they're still together, but I don't think they've had a live band on that show since then. I could be wrong, but a lot of fun.
Who out of all the co-hosts, who did you get on the best with?
Wait, my favorite?
Yeah, who did you really get on with on the Atheist Experience?
Who do I really like? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I think Matt has done probably the most work and spent the most time and gotten the most effect out of the show as an individual host. And I'm proud as hell that the guy has worked so hard and has put a good, friendly face on atheism, but also has shown that we're firm, we're strong, we're in these days anyway. And some people call it the new atheism. I don't think there's anything new about atheism. What's new is that we're communicating more and more confidently. And Matt is putting on a confident face and putting out a confident attitude. That's important. We're strong and firm, but fair and respectful, and that he encompasses all those things in the right dimensions. I mean the right amounts, and is so consistent and long term and dedicated. That's I would say he's probably my favorite. Jeff D is amazing. He's very strong, again, very firm in these issues, and doesn't take crap. And Jeff D's way of responding with this razor-sharp logic is impressive, because when, he used to be a guest a lot on the first year of the show, and I was impressed back then, but I wasn't as confident as him on some of these issues. But here's a guy who's just really upfront honest, and that's so important to our message. Of course, Russell Glasser and Martin Wagner and so many others have done great work and contributed to the show, and I've always been a fan, I always will be, and I just think, I'd love to be a guest again. It's been a while, but they're doing such a great job.
Yeah.
In and of themselves, the show has been so successful that I don't know if it's the most well-known atheist talk show in the United States, but it probably is, and for good reason. And I'm absolutely proud as hell to have been a part of it for any amount of time. And if you go look at those YouTube videos, there's almost a year of those that I've uploaded the first year. And suffice to say, we didn't know nearly as much about it back then as they do now. So please judge with mercy in all the technical issues. And sometimes I said things that were utterly wrong. So that's okay. We make mistakes, and I learned from that. Yeah.
So basically, were you there when the first caller threatened Jeff D with hell, and you saw that famous reaction he has?
I was there for the first few episodes.
Were you there the first time Jeff D got threatened with hell?
I don't know. Probably. I mean, if it was in the first year, I was probably there, but I don't know. I mean, it's so silly to threaten him with hell. I mean, that happened to all of us eventually. I mean, some people would call in and just make that sweeping threat of anybody who's not in their own church or denomination. But if it was a personal threat like that, I don't remember anything specifically, but just that a lot of callers would call us who were angry at us. Yeah. Now, the vast majority were friendly callers or neutral. Yeah. So I never felt bad about having callers. I never felt bad about our reaching out to theists, because that's so important. There's a place for communications between our movements, and a lot of people don't want to do that, and I totally understand. But people like me have stepped up to take on the duty of, and I do think it's a duty, to communicate with the other side, because we learn a lot about them and they learn about us. And I really think that a lot of things that divide us are based in a lack of education or an ignorance about the other side, which can be solved easily with just one person talking. I recently talked to a pastor on Facebook who was saying that atheists want to eliminate all symbols of religion on all property, private and public. And I said, well, wait a minute now. We're not going after somebody's church or cross on their church or at home. If it's on private property, we don't care. Everybody's got a right. And we're talking about government property. And he just didn't really have a response. I honestly think that either he was trying to convince people of that position and didn't believe it, or he actually believes that we are going literally after everything in somebody's home. And I says, no, that's preposterous. First of all, we don't have the mouth power, the manpower, the money power to go after everything. Come on. But it's ludicrous to try that in our world. I mean, first of all, we respect freedom of conscience for everyone. That means if you do have that belief, we're not going to try to say you don't, or you don't have a right to assemble in your home or on your private property. It's just that the government doesn't have the individual right of religious expression that's guaranteed us in the Constitution. The government is not an individual. The government is something other than a person whose rights need to be protected. It is not an individual or a group. It is something different. And when we talk about religious expression, we're talking about a right guaranteed to people. And so when they try to put a religious icon or a monument or a statement somewhere on government property, even if it's just a dollar bill or if it's a courthouse, that is the government expressing its individual religious expression, and that's ludicrous. And so we're going after what shouldn't be there and has been allowed to happen too much when the government expresses something that it can't. They think it's them expressing it. They always say that too. You're coming after us and our religion and our expression. When we're talking about a monument on a courthouse lawn, they personalize it. They make it their own. And they say, this is my religious expression you're going after. Well, you don't own the courthouse, sir. But it's my religion. They're trying really hard to put that together in their mind, and a lot of them are convinced that because it's Christian or Judeo-Christian in nature, that they own it, even if it's on the Supreme Court walls. And we have to convince them that you don't amount to the government. The government is not an individual. The government does not have human civil rights because the government is not an individual human, and that's not going to change. But they've already had plenty of time to go right across that line anyway and make all these laws respecting an establishment of religion. No, I think we've got a lot of work to do in that area, but these days we're making a lot of progress, and I'm so proud to know that I'm lucky enough to live in a country, like so many others, where it's safe for us to say these things, for now. But we've really got to continue and keep up and saying these things to maintenance our liberties, if you ask me.
I think, Joe, if you're all right with this, we've got a caller wanting to ask you some questions. So we'll just go and we'll add him into the call. You guys can give me a second here.
Absolutely.
Hi guys.
Hi there. You're on, so ask your question.
Hi. Yeah, I had 3 questions. Well, 2 at first. But recently you're speaking about symbols on private and public property. Actually made me think of the World Trade Center cross, you know, the one that was left over from the ruins of the 9/11 attack. There was some debate as to whether to include it because it was state property, the memorial, or to not include it because it's a religious symbol on public property. So what are your thoughts on that?
Boy, that is a very complex subject. The rule of thumb with state-church separation is who owns the land that it sits upon. Not who pays for it, not how it was found, and not who put it there. Although those factors can come into play and can actually cause a state-church issue, the main issue usually is location. Location, location, location. It's so important. In the case of the World Trade Center, that was private property, I understand. Now, I'm not from New York, but if the World Trade Center was owned privately, then whatever remained of it on that private land is probably private
But
property.
if the memorial is owned by the state, does that make it state or joint state-private? I'm not sure what the issue is there.
That makes it more complex, for sure.
And I've heard the argument that some would leave it as it's not that big an issue and it gives people hope in a very dark time. Others would say that it's religion sneaking in as it did with the money, in God we trust. So that's why I brought it up, because I'm a bit confused on the issue and I'm sort of in this middle gray area, and I'm not sure which I would do, put in the position of being a lawmaker.
Well, first of all, noticing the cross as an actual pattern was, in my opinion, the insertion of religion, or at least a religious person going there and saying, hey, let's look at this specifically, religion. And that's on that private property where that came from, if it's private. I'm pretty sure it is. But then putting it into a state-owned property of a museum or something like a memorial, something like that, anything owned by the government, we have to ask ourselves, is this something appropriate? Now, see, there is context. A courthouse should not have a cross on it. But a cemetery that's owned by the government, that's more appropriate, isn't it? At least I think most atheists agree that when we go to a cemetery, we can expect to find crosses, not because the government wants to endorse religion so much, but because the people buried under there did, and their families. And that as a freedom of expression, that part's covered. Even if it's government-owned property as the cemetery that it is. Like Arlington National Cemetery, lots and lots of crosses. Well, we understand that those crosses have an immediate connection to the people buried under them. Even if they weren't crucified, okay? Even if Jesus died 2,000 years ago, even if crucifixions are not how anybody in these wars, these particular wars, died, that there is still a connection that's direct and that's pointed directly to the person there, that it's not intended to be an endorsement of religion by the government. So, yes, there are situations where a government-owned property would have the context necessary to encompass a religious symbol without violating state-church separation. But you know, at the Supreme Court building, there's the Ten Commandments plaques on the wall right there. And they open up every Supreme Court session by saying, Oyez, 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 God save this court. And other courts are worse. It usually is very clear-cut. But with the complex situation like the Memorial Cross there at World Trade Center, that's something that I really need to work on more, and I haven't. You know what, I look at it like this. That's one cross. It's big, but that's just one. There are crosses all over government land, all over this United States. It's an epidemic of how many crosses there are, illegally located, without government permission, without authorization. And I'd be more focused on those for the sheer numbers. They get a lot more exposure. But this one cross was in the news, and there was a lot of hoopla about it, so a lot of different groups got involved. But I really think that there are larger, more important crosses. Larger in the scheme of things, more important in their largeness, in other words.
Okay, I have two more short questions, if that's okay with you.
Yep, fine, by the way.
Okay, the first one was regarding that Nigerian pastor, and I've noticed this pattern that a lot of people just accept this alternative to conventional medicine, even if there's no evidence supporting it. And what worries me is that even atheists like Bill Maher, who I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I apologize, claims to be a skeptic. He endorses homeopathy or this organic only eating. He's against vaccines, so that's kind of worrying that someone who claims to be a skeptic tends to fail in this respect. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is there a pitfall for everyone, or can the pseudoscience regarding either possession or healing by drinking tea, curing AIDS by drinking tea or whatever nonsense can spread?
That's one reason why hero worship is not a good idea. See, a lot of people really love his opinions on one issue, but not others, and so, like every other human being, we can find things we disagree with. Yeah, Bill Maher is a really great guy, very intelligent, but on certain things, he's not thinking so bright. And so, we got to disagree, and it's so important to say that the ideas are what we agree on, and that the individual personalities, maybe not, but that we're not going to get hung up on that problem. That it's not a problem. It's not going to be a problem for us because we're not so much into hero worship of a charismatic leader who has to be perfect in our eyes, or else we have to adjust our thinking. It's not like that. In our movement, we're more honest. I love that about our movement. Bill Maher is wrong on certain things and right on others, and same thing with Penn Jillette, I found some things to disagree with him on. It's amazing.
You mean Penn and Teller on global warming? Like they called it this seductive conspiracy theory? I think it was an older episode, but I don't know. I just want to facepalm when I see it.
Yes. Well, and I'm not even sure of their ideas on that. I heard some others that I disagreed with right away. But and again, I don't get angry or hung up on it. I still love them, and I still enjoy Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and I still like Chuck Norris movies. You know.
Oh, that Bible ad! Oh my God.
And Ted Nugent's music only. You know, if they would just stick to what they do.
We should change the meme.
Yeah,
Someone
exactly.
suggested that we change it to Stephen Hawking instead.
Okay, last one.
I think that would be hilarious, but well.
Okay, last question I had was about cult leaders and the threat of how they perceive children, and regarding also that Nigerian pastor. I don't know, do you think she views the children as a threat because parents love them unconditionally, so they won't be as devoted to her? Because I've heard this happening in many cults where the cult leader feels threatened by the children because parents love them unconditionally. So they're losing devotees, so to say. So what are your thoughts on this?
That could certainly arise. That problem can arise if they go after the children, because most children have parents somewhere who care about them, but they're also going after orphans. There are a lot of orphans in Africa, and it's truly sad that they're being scapegoated. I think that one reason why I think they're going after children for these things is because children are less likely to fight back and less likely to know how, less likely to have their rights respected by law enforcement, and more likely to have someone in control of them all their lives so far, and so they are conditioned to just obeying any adults. Over here we have this saying, don't talk to strangers, don't take candy from a stranger, things like that. But in Africa, it's just not so clear, and lack of education and a lack of supervision for a lot of young people means that they're vulnerable and can't fight back as much. You know, you or I would call the police. We would fight back and defend ourselves physically if we had to. But a child...
So it's targeting the most vulnerable to get the point across, right?
Sure. And, well, they're also less likely to say you're a scam artist. There is no supernatural anything going on here, and that people look like this because they're in need of medical help or because they just look different, and you're going to have to deal with it. This is a country where a lot of poverty exists, and Helena Pabio and her followers have been violent. There's a video showing some of her followers breaking into a humanist conference and taking it over. They basically crashed the party, basically. Not with guns, but with their bodies. They went in there and on stage and yelled and danced and screamed, and it's an amazing video because I've been to a lot of conventions and conferences in the free thought realm here in the United States, and it's always been peaceful. There's been protesters, but nothing like this, and it would scare the crap out of me if I was there. I also don't know that I wouldn't have been violent back, because there was some violence, and they were pushing people around on the stage. And so if you look at that video, it's shocking, but these are the same church members who support her, and that she leads them, and she's coming here, and there are some followers of her here in the United States. So it is of great concern how people are being mistreated there and how she wants to spread that here. And again, number one, I don't think she'll be very successful in spreading it here, but we'll be more successful in spreading our message to her if we do it while she's here than when she's not here. You know, it's a great opportunity. It doesn't come around often, and it's like when the Pope visits the United States. There's always at least a Pope picket somewhere. And the last time the Pope did come, the last Pope, I organized a picket here in Austin, Texas, at a big Catholic church, and he didn't even come to Texas, and I didn't need him to. So that's... And when the next Pope comes to the United States, I've got 2 professionally made picket signs ready to go. And, you know, at the time people said, hey, that's wrong, you shouldn't picket a church. He's a man of God, and that's a church, and he's not even in Texas. And
Have you seen that the new Pope looks a bit like Emperor Palpatine? Just a little bit. Maybe he's bringing Darth Vader along. Yeah, actually, I saw a Thinking Atheist video earlier today about a man named Akintoba from Nigeria, and he said that while most people are like severely poor, all the pastors have private jets, somewhere between 1 and 4. So that's scary to me. How much power you can gain from just doing nothing.
Right, and it's hard to believe. Now, also, and I don't want to make this a big point, but there's a poster being put out of the event in Houston, and there's other photographs and video of her all over YouTube. If you take a good look at her, you'll notice that she's quite well fed. In that country of Nigeria, where there's a great famine and terrible poverty, the leaders, like you said, the religious leaders eat well and get to go flying around the world to preach. And just the money put together for her to be able to fly to the United States for nothing more than a series of sermons and then to fly back. It's amazing that there's so much imbalance and that she's able to cause so much harm there in Nigeria. And I think the main reason why is because law enforcement in Nigeria is stressed and strained enough right now that they can't focus on something like this. But they also have people in law enforcement and government in Nigeria who believe this is real and believe that she's doing some good. So the ignorance goes right into law enforcement. We're not like that here.
Okay, just one last thing, and then I'll leave you because I think I've hogged the call too long. You think if one of these like cult personalities or heroes, as you mentioned, falls, do you think the cult will disband or just replace them? What do you think is more likely? If she, for example, she's arrested for doing something illegal in the U.S., she can't go back, the cult loses all connection to her. Do you think the cult will disband or just put a successor in her place?
If she's just arrested, they probably won't disband because there's always hope she could return. And being arrested gives her a bit of the martyr complex. So she might have just as much support sitting in a prison over here, even for 20 years.
2 words, Kanthovend.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
There
that answers my question. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for the answers.
Right, yep. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was nice. And
Yeah.
I don't think there was
So-
some people going to call there, but they've backed out, I think.
Okay.
No, they're not calling in. All right.
I had one little thing I wanted to plug.
Okay.
On March 8th in San Angelo, Texas, I will be at Angelo State University giving a speech about atheism and atheists. As part of a program, I was invited to give a speech in a program called Coexist in Faith, and I was invited by the campus ministry there. And I don't know, and I haven't spoken to students there from the Free Thought movement. I don't know if there's a Free Thought group on campus. So this is me going to speak to the general population at the school, invited by they're inviting people from all different major religions as well. But they wanted me to speak for atheists and atheism, so I'm going to be very happy to do that. That's San Angelo, Texas, Angelo State University, March 8th. What else? Anyway, it's good to be alive.
That sounds like a great event. Unfortunately, I won't be able to.
Yeah, for geographical reasons, I don't think we'll be there.
Yeah.
Also, any day now I'm expecting to hear from the Trail Foundation about the memorial brick for the Murray O'Hares that I successfully purchased with donations. And anytime now we're going to have an installation ceremony with some music and poetry. And it's a beautiful spot, and I'll make a video, and that's some good news.
Yeah.
So, did you actually ever get to meet Madeline Mary O'Hare?
No, I came along in the summer of '96, and they were kidnapped
Okay.
in September of '90. No, and part of my talk I wanted to give about the work I've done for AA in Austin included I was one of the employees who got the job of cleaning out their offices and boxing up their personal items.
Yeah.
And we were packing the whole building to move to New Jersey. And there were several offices that were now unused because most of the staff was let go after the Murray O'Hares disappeared. And, of course, the Murray O'Hares were the founder, the president, and the editor gone from the organization in one day. So there was a lot of empty offices after that. And the building was very large and usually had a staff of anywhere between 10 and 20 people. And so there were a lot of these offices being used, but it went dark after that. And when I got there, by the time I got there the summer of '96, it was a dark and kind of a lonely place.
Yeah.
We were trying to save on electricity, too, so we kept most of the lights off in the areas where nobody was working. But there was a whole department of art, design, and paste-up work. And because they did everything in-house, all the magazine work, and this was, again, before the Internet and before all these computer programs to help people put out a really fancy-looking magazine and newsletter, they did it mostly by hand. And they had a print shop. And so everything from start to finish happened in this building, and then they would mail it. But after the Murray O'Hares disappeared, at least 60% of what was happening there just stopped. And so one of my jobs was to box up personal items in their offices where they had worked. And it was very sad. Like I said, I never met them, and I really wanted to have. And I learned a lot about them and boxing up their personal items and watching videos and listening to tapes and speeches of what they said and did. And the old atheist TV show that they put out was the American Atheist News Forum, and I was able to view hundreds of episodes of that, which were archived. And so I'm very fortunate there, but I watched a whole lot of Madeleine O'Hare on TV and in speeches and the conventions and videos, and yeah, sadly boxed up their stuff, and we packed it up and moved out of there, but that's one of the fascinating things I got to do for AA. And because, you know, a lot of the people in the media and elsewhere would say that these are just evil people, and I saw a personal human side. I got to go to their house, too. At the time, they lived in a house in West Austin, and it was normal, middle-class looking house. They all lived together and as a family unit and saved money on bills like that, but found that that's the best way they wanted to live. They were all real close friends, and it was a nice house, but they had been kidnapped, and all their personal belongings were just left there. Breakfast on the table, food in the fridge, and their medicine, their underwear, and all these personal items that a person normally takes with them on a trip, all their luggage there. And it was sad. And so, you know, in the course of me working there, the IRS was after them for back taxes. And it was only personal taxes, not to do with the organization. And since they disappeared, they couldn't pay their tax bill, being all disappeared and stuff. So the IRS took their house. And when Spike was staying there to house sit, and we were at work one day, and they called us up. The police called us and said, "You might want to send somebody over to the house because we're taking it, and you need to get your personal items out of here." And Spike said, "Okay," and he put the phone down, and he just said, "Damn." And I said, "What, boss? What?" "We got to go. They're taking the house." So he and I, the two of us, only the two of us, got into the company van and went over to the house. And there was about a half a dozen different kinds of law enforcement there. IRS, Austin Police, Texas Department of Public Safety, the FBI, I think the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were there. And they wouldn't let us into the house. And Spike said, "Wait a minute now, you just called me and said that I need to get my personal items out. I've been living in there for almost a year now to house sit. And they wouldn't let us him get his own personal items. And we had to turn around and leave." And we did. He lost everything he owned except for what was in his office at the center at the time. Very sad, but I was the person who was there next to him, and I just wish I had a video camera at the time. But it was just amazing how badly they were treated after they had been kidnapped. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. But, you know, it was a very real, physical thing that the government was cracking down on these three people after they had been kidnapped, and that our organization was now under the microscope, so to speak, and that we were taking hits left and right, and that was one of them. And so, you know, I had to go with him to help him buy more clothes. They got his clothes, too. He had the clothes on his back. And so he had to go to these clothing stores, and he was a big guy, so he had to go to a big and tall shop to get suits, to do the business of being the director of the center. and it was sad. But we had to work out other living arrangements for him because of that suddenly happening. And that's one of the adventurous things that can happen to an atheist activist, is that sometimes you deal with the past in such an upfront and physical way that the law is involved, at least with that group. But that law part is pretty much done. I mean, there's nothing else that the government would have a problem with us about, or at AA anyway. And by the way, I'm no longer the Texas State Director, in case anybody's wondering. And that's one reason why I can spill all these wonderful stories. I had fun.
It was a question I was going to ask you, a bit of a hypothetical one. I mean, how would you ever think about what it would have been like if you had met Matt all those years ago when you were starting out and he was still a Christian? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, because he was a devout Christian, apparently, right through the beginnings of the show, in the first couple of years. Oh, I'm sure I'd be nice to him. You know, we got lots of calls from Christians over the years, but no, that is fascinating, isn't it? How a person can go from one side of the pendulum to the other, not wildly, but carefully, but definitely, and end up on our side. And you know, that's what I did. I was a Christian too. And so I've had both perspectives. That's true. A lot of atheists never had religion foisted on them, and so they're like second or third generation atheists and don't have the perspective that I did and some other atheists did when we were Christians, or just theists of a different type from what we are now. And we remember, you see, we have that perspective still in our memory. Now we have this new perspective to think about it from a second direction, you see. Yeah. And I often think that it's important for the leadership of atheist groups to try to have at least a few people with both those perspectives in their mind, instead of just people who are second and third generation atheists who never had to be somebody else's religious person, you know, never had to pray to somebody else's God. Now, I think that's an important part of our struggle, is the fact that a lot of our people are still having to be in the closet and pretend they're religious when they're really not inside and don't believe it. And they're going through a bit of hell because they're having to pretend by getting on their knees physically and go through the motions and go to church and do all the sacraments and lying to their friends and family and the general public when they don't want to, because they're honest. And it hurts for honest people to lie, right? That's a part of our struggle. I believe that most of the out-of-the-closet, outspoken atheists, at least in the United States, were once Christians and didn't necessarily want to be. But like myself, I knew both sides because I was once that devout Christian. That's the perspective. I have both sides of that, and I think that it helps me a little more to understand what the Christians are thinking right now and what we should be saying to them. And I'm not saying I'm better for that as an activist. I'm just saying that these are experience tools that we have in our memory that we carry with us. And if you're a good activist, you try to remember all the mistakes you make and to try to not make them again. But you also remember all the good things along the way, including all the perspectives you had on life as a person in general, and how I changed very slowly, but I changed definitely. It's a good change, and I tell you, it's refreshing to know our movement is doing so well.
Right, we've got another caller lined up here, 13 Heathens. Hello, 13, are you there?
I believe so.
All right, ask away.
Just lost video.
That's all right, we can still hear you. Are you there?
Oh.
I think we've lost him, have we? Okay, I'll try and... yeah, we've lost him.
Oh, internet.
Say, Joe,
curse the cyber gods.
Yeah, Joe, when you talk about your tech problems in the early days, we're no strangers to it either.
You know,
kind of a staple.
We had so many tech problems, and now they're not having nearly as many. I'm extra proud of that. Looks like he came back for a minute.
He's been trying to think of a question all show for you, and he just came up with one. So, one subject we didn't cover was your book, because I think in the last show we had with you, we only just kind of brushed over it very briefly because of the time restraint. And Joe's run away now. Oh no, he hasn't.
I had to grab a copy of my book.
All right, lovely. So have you found a publisher yet? Are you closer to getting a publisher? I think, if I remember right.
No, I've self-published this, but I
Okay.
haven't found a publishing company interested, and I pretty much stopped trying. I made my money back on this, plus a little bit, just putting it out myself, and I've put out probably 150 copies now, and I know that's not many. It's on YouTube as well. I read the whole thing to the camera on YouTube, and that's free, of course, but I wanted to put this out in paper form, and I don't want to chop down any more trees, but also it's kind of costly to do another printing. It's one of those books where I believe that it is just a little bit too hot for certain publishers, you
Yeah.
know. Even Prometheus Press, American Atheist Press, of course, all the mainstream presses, because I say things in this book I regret. But no, it's all about how I became an atheist in 9 years of Catholic school and church, and I kind of blow the whistle on the school that I went to, Holy Ghost Catholic School. Recently, one of my fellow alumni, have gone and made a video on YouTube about the church and a fundraising event they're trying to do for the Catholic Church. Oh, and it's really ironic, too. They're saying, we need to raise money for Catholic schools. And I just want to say, wait a minute now. When you say Catholic, are you talking about the Catholic that is associated with the Vatican and the warehouses full of gold that they have? Okay. So he made a video inside the school that I went to. And it's in bright color, good video quality. And there had never been a good video of that made on YouTube yet. So I was really watching it carefully. Flashbacks, woo! They haven't repaved the asphalt in the quadrangle where I smashed my head and my hands so many times, you know. But still operating, and they have a lot of alumni who really love that school. But I wrote a book about it and what was wrong with it back in the 70s and 80s. I graduated in 1983 after 8 years being there and 1 year of kindergarten at a different school before that. But the main thing is the Holy Ghost School itself. And the corporal punishment, yeah, you want to hear about that, it's in there, okay, good. And all the cutting up that we did, we were so bad sometimes. Our class had a reputation for being one of the worst behaved classes for decades. Very old school, actually. I found a Facebook page for alumni who went there, and they post photos, class photos, and team photos going back to the 40s and the 30s. It's amazing. And I haven't talked about my book there yet, but I'm trying to find a class photo with me in it, but that's tough to find. I tore mine up. I hated that school. But I had to write this book to tell people why I became an atheist, and it is often basically the same reason why a lot of other Catholics go atheist, going through the Catholic school system and having to do all the work for the religion at hand there and never really being given enough of an explanation as to why we couldn't just walk away from it. And that was a requirement for me up through 8th grade. And I did all the sacraments that I could have up until then. But, you know, when we graduated from that school after 8th grade, we made sure to go back on one night to let them know how we really felt about the place. But first we had to get one of our mothers to take us to the grocery store. One of our more lenient mothers, not mine. Mine wouldn't have done this. And we bought a bunch of toilet paper and a bunch of toothpaste and eggs and shaving cream. And she's with 6 or 7 bags full of groceries, you know, and took us right over to that school and dropped us off and said, okay, I'll be back in an hour. And we just let that school have it. And I wrote about that in the book. I don't want to give too much away, you know. In fact, I keep that towards the end of the book as kind of a dessert, but oh well. I don't know if they'll ever forget us there, but that is an atheist factory. Now, I have talked to a lot of my former classmates and said that I'm an atheist. What do you think? Are you still religious? Did you change like me? And I haven't found a single one who has changed like me. They are all still religious, or at least friendly to it. Even my best friends, we had a little circle of friends, and it seems to have affected me. All that prayer and corporal punishment seems to have affected me more than most. It didn't really hurt my sister very much, apparently. Now, she went through 1 year less than I did, so there's that. But she's more agnostic, and she doesn't have a lot of anger towards the Catholic Church or anything. And I think, okay, maybe 1 out of 1,000 people care this much to say something, at least to themselves, and say, it was a bunch of crap. And I don't mind not just internalizing that, but saying it out loud, too. A lot of people won't. Even if they don't believe it's real anymore, it's a barrier to go beyond feeling that way to actually acting on it and even saying something about it. And I'm one of those rare people who want to blow the whistle on what happened to me. I was not sexually abused. It didn't have to cover that. There was enough abuse of religious kinds, of physical abuse, of having to kneel all the time, and then the corporal punishment, the psychological terrorism of hell, and the endless confession, sorry this, and groveling that. All of that amounted to abuse towards children as young as 6 years of age, and the sexual part didn't even need to enter into it. I like to quote Tony Pasquarello once in a while. Where, he was also raised in a Catholic setting and went to church many, many times and was an altar boy. And he said, people ask him all the time, were you sexually abused in all that time working with priests? And he says, no, I was not sexually abused. What was happening in front of the altar was corruption enough. And he's right. We've now got a society that's dependent upon the self-abuse of going to church by yourself and getting on your knees. And not all denominations, of course, but there are some where they are absolutely old world about it. My old church still looks basically the same, and I want to go there and just sit in the pews and look at the kneelers and remind myself. When you look at a photograph of my church on the outside, you'll notice something interesting. No curves of any kind in the architecture of the building, all straight lines. And some of them are straight like an A, and they point. And it's a sharp point. It's like a hypodermic needle on top of that steeple. It's a steeple with a little cross. And man, if somebody were to fall onto that, they'd be toast. And it's like the whole church is a dangerous, it's not a blunt object, it's a dangerous impaling missile type object that's just sitting there. And you get the feeling, or at least I got the feeling, and I still do today, that this is the attitude. The architecture reflects the attitude. There's no curves, meaning that there's no gray area, and there's no tolerance. There's no bending on the rules. There's no attitude that says you're a human being, and even the attitude that you're a child and can't be expected to know all this stuff or care or to take sides. That's what we had to do, is to take sides in this great universal holy war of good versus evil. And yet all evil was outside of Christianity. And as children, when you tell children these things, one thing I also like to talk about is how in 6th grade we had religion class in every year, of course, an hour a day, in addition to going to church twice a week. But also, we had religion class with a textbook, 2 textbooks. One was our religion textbook with actual questions and answers in it, and the other was the Bible. And it was the Good News version, the Douay, the Catholic version. It's really, really big, thick paperback Bible, right? So we're carrying this much books to religion class, and no other class has that much weight in textbook. Anyway, one of the pages of the inside of this religion class book, and all of the pages had illustrations, but one of them showed an illustration of hell and what to expect and what it looks like. And somebody took a lot of time and care to illustrate with painting a whole lot of people naked, burning, dripping with acid, smoking, on fire, dying, and then being revived again instantaneously. So they constantly repeat the cycle of suffering until they die, and then being brought back to suffer some more in eternity, forever. And they wanted us to that's why I go like this sometimes. I mean, they wanted us kids to learn all this crap, and things they won't tell adults. I mean, I went to with my family to church every Sunday as well. And, they were a lot nicer to us students then when we were with our families. The nuns weren't there, to make sure of everything, but also the sermons were nicer. The lesson was nicer. And we didn't have the religion book to tell us all these graphic images of punishment. They wouldn't tell adults these things, but they told us. And I remember. I remember, and I wrote it down. And so for the rest of my life, I want to try to tell people about what's going on in some of these more fundamentalist denominations like Catholicism, and say this is one of the most powerful and one of the most successful and wealthiest religious groups there ever was in human history. We're still allowing them to lie to other people's children, a terrible thing to lie about, and then ask them for a donation while they inspire our politicians in Washington and elsewhere to commit religious war. And it's just the status quo. It's the way we're supposed to live our lives. And I said a long time ago, look, we're in a country where we can speak freely, and you're telling me We're not. We're not complaining about that. You're telling me we have a guaranteed right to petition our government for a redress of grievances, and you're not? They're deeply infiltrated by the Catholic Church, and they're making decisions based upon what the Catholic Church wants. Recently, there's been a big fight about contraception in churches, and I'm surprised that anybody's ever standing up to them. But now we're finding out more and more reasons to complain about that. One of the largest denominations, we're also finding out it's not just them. All major denominations, including Jews, have their own problems with these bad apples who are abusing people. Rabbis, yeah, and then Muslim imams. It's across the board. And once again, I'm coming back to the fact that the free thought movement seems to be behaving itself much better. I'm proud. Thumbs up. I'm in the right side. You know?
Yep. Joe, there was one question from someone in the room. Darwin is through, and he's asking, what's it like to live day to day in a religious state?
Well, I live in Austin, which is in Texas, in the Bible Belt, a very conservative state, but Austin is a liberal oasis in a sea of conservatism. Austin is a strange thing in the middle of Texas. You know, we're very liberal. It's a medium-sized city, and I don't get out much out of Austin. I try to. If I leave Austin, I'm surrounded by hordes of conservatives, crosses on the side of the road, too many churches, billboards, and a lot of poverty because of the subsidized situation with taxation of churches that don't have to pay taxes, and they turn them into a mega church. Like if I drive between Austin and San Antonio, there's this really huge mega church, among others, but this one is just gargantuan. And it just says to me, we have a problem with our economy where a lot of people are losing their jobs and losing their homes due to foreclosure and things like that, while the churches are profiting hand over fist. And in most hard, very poor neighborhoods where there's a great deal of poverty and decay, you'll always find churches. You'll always find churches that are doing well. Here in the Bible Belt in Texas, it's the same. And, you know, like I said, outside of Austin, it's scary sometimes. I go to visit Houston and Dallas and other small towns as well, and it's like going back to the 1950s sometimes. And we still have state church issues in which these small towns will have a school district in their public schools where they assume that they're so far out that even the ACLU won't hear about it. And they're just wrong. We've got to do something. But, you know, we're up against so much. It's hard to cover all of these things. When I was the Texas State Director for American Atheists, I did a lot, but there was so many things to try to take care of, so many leaks in the dam to try to plug, and I only had 10 fingers, and they only stretched this far, and it's difficult volunteer work. And I couldn't spend a lot of time on it either. I'm working all the time, but yes, in the Bible Belt here, we're living a constant museum life, if you will. We're living inside of a historical setting where the history is such that we live in this amazing country that is founded on freedom and the concept of domination, philosophically, religiously, and those two clash. Those two ideas, they seem to clash, right? But somehow we're able to make it work here with relative peace. And if nothing else, I think we should be showing that as a lesson to the world, is that in the most socially, culturally, ethnically, and religiously diverse country in the world, kind of like a melting pot experience and an experiment, that the fact that we're not at each other's throats all the time, like in some other countries, shows that religious people can get over their big differences, and they can grow to tolerate the presence, at least the presence of people who disagree just down the block. You know, we've got mosques being built all over the United States now, and at first it was tough for a lot of conservative Christians to handle that, but they're getting over it slowly, and I think the rest of the world, including devout Muslims and fundamentalist Muslim countries, can take a lesson from that and learn that everybody on the planet, including themselves, starting with themselves, they will have a better life if they just let reason enter into their thinking more and let religion rest a while. You know, They've had so much time and power. Give it a rest. That's what I say.
Okay, I think we've got 13 back, so we'll take his call, hopefully.
Second time lucky.
Hello, 13.
Hey, it looks like it actually kicked in that time.
Yep. So you're live, so your question to Joe then.
Yeah, back when whether it be working with the ACA or with back when you were on the show, did you guys tend to get a lot of death threats from theists? Or were they pretty rare?
No, I can't even really think of any. With the ACA, no. Not that I'm aware of. Now, others, I'm sure, may have experienced something like that, but not me, personally. Now, when I was on the show, I was only on for a year, and after 2.5 years, I left to go to New Jersey and came back mostly just as a call-in guest. I wasn't as involved when I came back. But with American Atheists, it's a little different. There's an organization that's been around a lot longer and has pissed off a whole lot more people in the general population around the world, and especially with Murray versus Curlett, that 1963 Supreme Court case that ruled it's unconstitutional to require public school students to pray in public schools. A lot of people got very angry about that. And it's interesting because we got a lot of hate mail over the years, a lot, especially Madeline, and she went on interview on TV and radio again and again, and this generated more hate mail, all year after year after year, and for decades. And they wouldn't throw it away. They collected it. They kind of liked that stuff. And they called it nut mail.
When I'm doing my YouTube videos, when I get the occasional threat, I'm always really happy to get them. It's like, yay, somebody cares enough to threaten me.
There you go. That means you're effective.
But at the same point, most of the threats I get are these really wishy-washy, like you're going to burn in hell or this kind of stuff. Never anything that's really has any quality to it. It's like there's no originality in the threats that I've gotten from any of them.
Well, this leads me, I guess I should talk about this finally. There was one person in New Jersey when I worked there who really, really hated us. And he lived in New Jersey and was born and raised there, very close to where we had our building. But he had always been a problem for the community. And when he discovered who we were and made the mistake of trespassing on our property, and I said that you need to leave, he became very, very angry at me and the building. And at the time didn't really know who was in the building, but found out over the course of time and began to stalk me and began to vandalize the building. This was a crazy person, though, not a representative of religion. However, he made clear to us that he was a Christian and that he hated the fact that we were atheists. Now, he went through periods of being homeless and being in jail for a while, and he was always drunk out in public. It was basically a crazy person who would wander around, never had anything to do, no job. But he also would terrorize the neighborhood sometimes. And
it's a matter of what they're fixated on.
Right, and control. But he didn't have any kind of a decent life to point at and say that he was better than us, so we didn't really try that. But I did not respond. I was under instructions when I'm at work there to not respond to him because he was a crazy person. That would just provoke him. But this did not discourage him, and he continued to vandalize the building. And, well, we had a sign on the door saying it was American Atheists, and he eventually read that, I believe, and started referring to our atheism, and painted our building with a cross, and then dropped a bunch of church pamphlets, and then he threw a bunch of trash, and then smashed a planter, and threatened to kill me several times. And he was so mad at me, and we couldn't figure out why, except to say that I said that I would call the police on him if he didn't leave us alone. And I guess that's all it takes with some people, is that he was just looking for a fight anyway. Some people are bored and drunk and have nothing to do all day except wander around and try to start a fight. And it's a bad human condition, and it's very rare. But, we stumbled upon a guy who was the neighborhood bully. Well, this culminated in a great many visits and a great many times me calling the police on him, and they could never really arrest him because they didn't have evidence of an actual crime. Even though he would go there at night and vandalize, and we had security cameras, and we would catch him in the act on the cameras, it was black and white, and there was no sound, and it was dark at night, and he moved fast, things like this. So they could never arrest him.
And you also weren't a protected group at the time.
Well, that too. Now, I felt the police were doing the best they could, but also remember that they knew him very well. In fact, I talked to some police officers who went to high school with him, and they said, "Oh yeah, he's been ever since he got out of high school. He's been the neighborhood bully, and so we know him very well." And I says, "Well, don't people call on him and follow through?" And they said, "People call, but they don't follow through." And I said, "Well, screw that. That's the end of that. I'm following through. He's terrorizing me, and was raising kids at the time, and they would hang out at the building sometimes too and see him. And he would also get very vulgar, and what he was saying to us would be sexual sometimes. And so I was serious about wanting to do something about it. So I got as much video evidence as I could with the surveillance cameras, and it just wasn't enough for them to arrest him. But I collected it anyway and documented everything, every visit, and what time it was, and then I called 911 and all these things, okay? And then one day, with my kids there, he decided to do more, and I kind of thought he would, so I pulled out a different camera, a better camera. While the other surveillance ones were going, of course, I pulled out a color camera with sound, camcorder, and set it up on the bumper of my van. Well, I saw him next door talking to our neighbor, and I thought he for sure will come over and mess with us as we're trying to leave the building for the day. And I was right. As soon as he saw us trying to leave our building, he came out of the other building and came out to give us a bunch of crap. I got it all on video, and I put it on YouTube in 2 parts, and I added it to the series called When Christians Misbehave. If you just go to YouTube and do a search for When Christians Misbehave, this is the crazy Nazi biker Christian who attacked us. He was constantly referring to Adolf Hitler. He gave the Nazi salute, Sieg Heil. He mispronounced it, but we knew what he was talking about. Also, he claimed to be a member of the Pagans motorcycle gang, though he probably didn't have a motorcycle. We never saw him on one. He actually got in trouble for stealing a BMX bicycle that belonged to a kid. And it was a very expensive one, too, so the cops were very upset about that. But when he came out of that building that day, I got it on camera, and he wanted to be on camera. He wanted everybody to see him. I think he knew that we were serious about the video camera. I had it in my hand. This was during the day. Finally, he came out during the day. And I had the camera in one hand and a can of mace, well, pepper spray, not even mace, it was pepper spray, which we had to make sure that was clear in court, too. But anyway, I never used it. I just made sure he saw it. And this really didn't stop him from giving us a display for a little over 9 minutes in the street. And I should say, though, it probably stopped him from actually hitting me. But he was so angry that he spilled his crazy thoughts in the street. And across the street over there was a daycare center, and there's businesses, there's houses, there's witnesses, and he didn't care. And he even said, I might go to jail again. I don't care. So he said these horrible things that I don't want to repeat, and if you want to hear it, make sure there's no kids in the room.
Will do.
He said
I'll check out that video. We'll go looking for it, definitely.
I posted a link to it in the video description. When Christians misbehave, Christian Nazi attacks.
Right. And it's important to note that he did 3 years in state prison for that attack. There's a lot more to it, including violence, but I followed through. See, that's the thing. I was treated like a real honest-to-goodness crime victim, because he did attack us physically, and you can see it in the video. But I followed through, and I was thanked profusely by police and other investigators for saying, what I did, and sitting in court day after day. And this was a long trial, too. And he never actually physically touched me, but he came pretty darn close and used weapons. No, the advice I would give to people if you're a crime victim, if you have the confidence and the ability, follow through like I did. And I had excellent evidence. That's the reason why anything happened, is because I got it all on camera. And the police even said that, without that video, we wouldn't have had anything. And we had a lot. And I tell you, we played that for the jury. And I'd already seen it many times, so I didn't look at the video. When they played it for the first time for the jury and the police and everybody in the courtroom, I turned my head and looked at the jury, and it just focused on their faces to see their facial reaction. And even the police were struggling to get to a position where they could see the TV clearly, because it was facing this way, and everybody wanted to see, because they'd always all heard, you should see what this guy said and did in the street to these people, a man, a woman, and a child. And it's unbelievable. He's here now. And he was also disrupting the trial process the whole time by yelling at the judge and cussing at his own lawyer and the jury. So everybody was talking about him. And I was the guy who moved to New Jersey, to this little town, who did the job, that other crime victims there weren't doing. I was the one who had the guts to go through the system and face him in court. And, over here it's a situation where the victim has to testify as to what happened while the perpetrator is sitting right over there. But when he gets called to the stand, I have to leave the room. I never saw him testify. There's court rules. I wanted to hear his side. I wanted to find out why he was so angry. But all we heard was that we're atheist scumbags, and that we're in his town, and he's going to drive us out, and he was going to blow up our building, and that atheists, are evil whores, and we're filthy, and that Hitler is God.
The Hitler is God part's a surprise.
Yeah, is God. Yeah. Plus, he threatened to rape me. This is obviously somebody who's got anger from other issues, and I knew what was going on here. And so that's why I wasn't so angry in general at the guy. I didn't take it too personally, because I was the new guy to town and he had other issues. Other people in the neighborhood had been pushed around by him, so this was not something new to the neighborhood. It was new to me and new to American atheists. And so I followed through, and they put him in prison, and he got out already, but he got sober. For 3 years he couldn't drink. This was a guy who was breakfast, lunch, and dinner drinking all over town. And I'm hoping it did some good, but in case you're wondering, yeah, I've taken measures to make sure that I'm safe from him. But, he came up for parole one time, and I communicated with them, and I said, please don't parole him. And I gave them my reasons, and they seemed to have agreed. So he did all those years. Time out 1 minute, okay?
Okay, no problem.
Anyway, we took care of that. It was difficult, and I learned a lot, and I really hope that other people stay strong like I did. And this has been great, but I have to go.
Okay, thanks very, very much for your time, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. It's been a great show.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for having me again.
No problem.
All right. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks again,
Yeah,
Joe.
you too.
Thumbs up, everyone, to Joe.
Okay, I think I'm gonna have to take off as well now because I actually haven't eaten anything since lunch,
All right.
and it's midnight here. So I'm gonna go eat.
Okay. Good night, Marty. Great to have you
Good
on.
night.
Good night.
And,
bye, guys.
Hey, will you be back in 2 weeks?
Hopefully.
Yeah, because we think it's looking very likely we've got Bionic Dance as our guest.
Oh, great.
cool.
Well,
And Big Lundy's going to be back as well, so
okay.
that's petrol plus match stuff going on there.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. So yeah, I'm gonna do my best to be there. I should be able to make it.
And then 2 weeks after that, live Ponage again.
Oh, awesome.
All right. So,
Okay. See you guys.
all right. Cheers, Marty. Bye. One by one, they're all going.
We're
I have
dropping like
And I have another show to go watch in a few moments, but I was going to ask one more question, just of the panel, so to speak,
Yeah, sure.
for a moment. That whole World Trade Center cross thing, if they weren't calling it a cross, do you really think anyone would care?
No, I don't think so.
It's the Jesus and Toast. To me, it's just the Jesus and Toast stuff again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, been nice joining y'all. Have a good
Nice.
day.
Yeah, we'll see you. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks for calling in.